At first he was afraid to lift it because he thought, well, maybe it's too early, maybe the sun's not up yet. And yet he felt, yes, the sun is up, I can remove the blindfold. And as he removes the blindfold, he looks where 10 feet away his father has been sitting all night watching over him. The song Leader of the Band is so tremendously special to me because it was what we played at my father's funeral. And I chose that song specifically for him because it really depicted who he was. It also, I felt, depicted his struggle. You know, an only child, alone and wild. My father was an only son. And he and his sister were actually raised separately. He was raised by his grandmother, where his sister was raised by his mom. And yet, growing up in Louisiana, in New Orleans, it's just shy of a caste system. Because it is very important. The question is, who are your people? So as the first son of the first son, my father was the one who was going to be taking over the family. So he led a particularly, you know, in some ways it was almost charmed at first because he lived with his grandmother. And then he lived with his mom and his father. My dad had a very troubled relationship with his father. They both shared the same name, Albert Augustine. And they looked identical. And yet there was a conflict that was constantly between them. And my grandfather was very hard on my father. And so at the age of 15, my father lied his way into the Air Force and went to the Korean War. A quiet man of music, denied a simpler fate. He tried to be a soldier once, but his music wouldn't wait. For my father, that music was his ability to connect with people. My dad will always remain the single strongest empath that I know. He not only was able to detect and perceive the emotions of others, he could project it. If you spent any time with my dad, ultimately you would feel whatever it is he chose you to feel in that moment. And he didn't even have to say a word to do it. He was very politically minded. And he saw the idea of being able to connect with people, being able to utilize that. For him, it was a tool to basically achieve what he needed to. So there was an aspect of light and shadow in it, but you know, he always came from that place of strength. And when we were small, my dad stayed in the military. My mother was military, but she retired since at that time you could not be in the Air Force and be pregnant. So after they married, my mother retired. But my dad was gone most of the time. He only came back when we were going to get ready to move again. Or, you know, there was a leave. And considering the fact that my oldest brother was born in April of 1960, my older sister was April of 1961, I was August of 1962, and my younger brother was October of 1963. Everybody knew when my dad was home on leave. People thought my mother had the only 18-month pregnancy on record. It's like, you're still pregnant? No, it's another one. Oh, Al was back. So he was off being a soldier. He was off doing Air Force and communications, and we were at home with my mom. So when my dad would come back, I mean, my mom had us. I mean, she was also an Air Force sergeant. So, you know, it's like 12 o'clock was lunch, 1 o'clock was nap, 5 o'clock was dinner, you know, 7 o'clock was baths. You know, our entire existence was very regimented, which I would guess was the only way she did not go nuts. Having 4 small kids, it's like, all right, we're just going to regiment them. So when my dad would come back, you know, he'd want to do things like, oh, we're going to the park, but it's 12 o'clock. It's time for lunch. No, we're going to go to the park, but it's 12 o'clock. It's time for lunch. And I know that was kind of hard on my dad because he said he felt like an outsider. He would tell us to do something, and we'd look at my mom. And he said how hard that was because he didn't know how to be the father he wanted to be because his father had not been that for him. And I really feel for our brothers who step into that. There is no training. There is no, and often when you base it on the relationship you had, you know, There was an entire generation where men don't cry, big boys don't cry. You don't talk to anybody about your problems. When you come back from the military, you just suck it up. You don't get help. And as far as being a father was concerned, you know, I'm sure my grandfather was damaged by his father. He didn't know how to do it. And yet, you know, fathers are expected to be able to step up and know how to do it. It's like, okay, you're a guy, you know how to fix a car. You know how to do plumbing. It's like, I don't know how to fix a car or do plumbing. My ex-husband used to admit that readily. You be the guy today. It's like, really? And he goes, well, we're both just guessing, but you usually guess better than I do. It's like, okay, fair enough. But fathers were expected to be able to, you know, work all day because, you know, that was their job. They had to work. They had to make sure there was food on the table. When my dad retired from the military, he didn't have a high school diploma. My dad left school. He didn't get his GED until much later. So he got a job as a security guard because that's what he could do. And we ate hamburger a lot. And my dad felt like a failure, he said, every time my mom had to make hamburger. Because he felt that we should have been affording steak, that was his job to make sure we had steak. Because that was important to him. Because he had to figure out what being a father meant because he didn't know by his childhood. So he worked really hard. He got a job as a security guard. He worked every possible shift he could, which once again took him from us to a degree. He seemed to accept that, well, I guess I get to miss these years because he missed so much. But he knew it was his job because everybody said when you're a man, when you're a father, it's your job. You make sure that everybody is fed. If something is going wrong, it's your fault. And that's what he carried. And at the same time, he was trying to figure out what it meant to be a father to children who he didn't have a chance to bond with really when they were young. He had 2 sons and 2 daughters, and he figured out that fathering for sons is totally different than fathering for daughters. And he had 2 daughters with different personalities. So it's like, okay, why are people crying? I don't know why people are crying. I was my father's princess. And I will say that with great pride. And all of you who were the princess, you know who you are. High five. I was that because even though we were apart, I adored my father. I mean, there was a spiritual contract between us. I absolutely adored my father. And even when he was away, you know, my mom would write letters to him, and I'd scribble out my little letter and, you know, give it to my mom to put in the mail for him. There was a nickname that I had that only me and my dad knew. And so I'd write that at the bottom. And then, you know, I'd seal up my little envelope so my mom wouldn't see. It's like, you know, none of my mom's business about my letter to my dad. And when he announced that he was leaving the military, the only good thing, because I love military life, but the only good thing I saw about that was the fact my dad was going to be home. And that, you know, when he got sick, I would be able to take care of him. My mom was not a touchy-feely kind of person, but, you know, she showed her love in different ways. My dad wanted attention when he was sick. He wanted a lot of attention. He wanted a bell. He wanted, you know, and so that was my job. I was his nurse, and I'd fold a little paper hat and draw a little cross on it. And I had a little white dress, and I would put on my white dress, and every time, and, you know, and it's like every hour I'd go in and I'd check on him, and I'd say, how is our patient today? And he said, well, your patient would like some orange juice. Okay. And I would go and you know, do my little thing. But that was something special just between us. When Dottie asked me to do this, I was thinking about what was the most defining moment between my father and I. That truly father and child moment. And what immediately came to mind is, you know, after my dad retired, we were doing dishes together. And my dad said, you know, it's like, well, Dad, can we get a dishwasher? And he goes, I got 4 dishwashers and 4 dish dryers. You guys figure it out, that's why I had you. But for some reason that night, he was washing the dishes and I was drying and putting away. And I was a tremendously clumsy child. I mean, clumsy child. The fact that I managed to survive, I was the one who would go, it's like, hey mom, I need to clean the tub. Do you know where the ammonia and the bleach are? And she'd tell me, and then she goes, wait. Go outside and help your father. Help your father. And I was outside, my dad was working in the garden, and those little trowels with the 3 prongs in it, and I was, doing that, and my mind would wander, and all of a sudden, my dad goes, stop! And I look, and I had pegged his fingers were in between the prongs. Oh, God. And he goes, baby, go inside and help your mother. And I'd come back, and she's like, what are you doing here? Daddy sent me inside. What did you do to him? Nothing. Go watch TV. Which is what I wanted to do anyway, so it worked. But, I was very clumsy. And, and I would catch flack. Later on, I found out that it was because I was forced to be right-handed after being born left-handed. One of the effects was I stuttered badly for years after that. I mean, really badly. And the other one was I became very clumsy. And so I was putting away the glasses, and I was just like, I can't drop the glass, I can't drop the glass, I can't drop the glass. And I was holding on to it. My father looks at me and goes, what's wrong with you? And I looked at him and I said, I can't drop the glass because if I drop it, you'll get mad at me and you might not love me. And my father looked at me and he said, sweetie, I will always love you. You could drop that glass and I would not love you any less. In that next moment, I have no idea why I did it. To this day, I don't know. I took the glass in my hand. I didn't just drop it. I threw it to the ground and shattered it. And then I looked up at my father. His first glance was, what? What the hell is wrong with you? And he just stood there looking at me. And my eyes began to well up with tears. And he saw in that little tiny face a little girl who needed more than anything else in that moment was to hear that her daddy loved her, no matter what. So he got the broom and he got the dustpan and, he cleaned it up and he made sure that I wasn't hurt. Then he told me, I will always love you forever. And I said, what if you die? And he said, I will love you even after I die. That moment between us has always been so special to me because it was the defining moment when I don't think I felt more like he was my father. The tools that my dad were given were not to do that. The tools that my dad was given was to yell, to berate, to accuse of being crazy. He wasn't given those tools. He had to learn them on his own. And what inspired him in that moment to be able to do that, I will always be grateful for. Because it wasn't easy. He said that he would sit and watch us watch shows like Daddy Knows Best, or Father Knows Best, and Make Room for Daddy, and Leave It to Beaver, and later on the Brady Bunch and Family Affair. And it was always the case where the dad comes home from work and within 30 minutes he's got everybody's problem solved. And nobody got hit. And and nobody got yelled at, and nobody had names called. And to him it was like, oh great, I get to work all day and then come home and be a sitcom dad. Because that was what he believed we expected from him. And, we all knew it was pretend. It's like, okay, we watched the Three Stooges, but we're not going to go at each other with scissors, are we? No. But to him, he didn't realize that that's not what we expected of him. And so he always tried to make that his reality. He got a job at Delmo Victor.
Yay, Delmo Victor.
Yeah, Delmo Victor.
I knew your dad.
Yeah, Corky knew my dad.
I worked with him, yeah.
And,
really?
he got that job. And he was just a file clerk, but every day he wore a suit and tie. Because, he figured, no, I want to make that impression. This is what I want to step up to. And that was back in the day when you could actually go into a company and work your way up to top management and never really have any credentials or diplomas or degrees or anything. It was like you worked and you demonstrated your ability by your work. And he worked his way up into management. And at that point, every weekend we had steak.
Yay!
And I mean like big, thick steaks. I don't know why we weren't all huge, but probably because we never got to stay home during the day. It's like, all right, get out to lunch. All right, lunch is over. Get out. Come back before the street lights come on. But he was very proud of that. And he was very proud of the fact that he bought himself a big behind Mercury Marquis that was like a freaking boat. And yet, that was his way of saying, I'm a success. I can buy jewelry for my wife, because that was important to my dad. I can buy jewelry for my wife. My children are all, doing well. And so he felt that was kind of like his benchmark, because he really didn't have any other benchmarks growing up. And I know of a lot of guys who don't have that template to follow, unless it came off, Leave It to Beaver. He would work a full day and come home, but he said he didn't feel like he was done working, because then he had to hold on to being the head of the family. He hated when my mother would say, wait till your father gets home. Because he figured, that's one more thing I've got to do. I wasn't there. You deal with it. But he felt that he had to, because that's what he figured dads did. It's not easy being a dad. It's not easy being, and I totally honor that, those who, like the women who step up as single parents, because, the fathers didn't have the tools. And that, they can be able to be that father and that mother, because in many ways I was. Because my ex-husband had to work a lot, because that was his template. I was the one who was at home with the kids, and my oldest son said to me that he spent yesterday with his dad. They did a thing together, but he actually felt it more appropriate to spend Father's Day with me. I taught him how to fight. I think he had his first beer with me. We talked about women. So he said, really, all that stuff, Dad taught me how to fix the toilet, and I don't think that, and I think he did it wrong, so pretty much you're the rest of it. And I honor my father, because he was the one who taught me that. He taught me strength. He taught me how to go into a room and go, okay, you need to observe this. We're in a political situation. Who's talking to who? Who are the movers? Who are the shakers? And he'd quiz me afterwards. And it's like, okay, who was the most important person in that room? I'd look at him and I'd go, you. And he'd go, okay, that's true. He said, but who was the second most important person? He said, if you wanted to get something done on a committee, who of those people would you pick to have involved in that? And these were the type of things that we would go over. And it was like, oh, okay. Now, at the same time, he told me that he did not make it a sexist world, but he would teach me how to live in it and to thrive in it. So I learned how to curtsy. I walked with books on my head. I learned the appropriate amount of time to make eye contact. I learned that if you are meeting your husband's boss for the first time, you do not offer your hand unless he offers his. I learned exactly how to stand in a supportive body language type of position to him, and I knew when to excuse myself to go do something with women or the kids so that the guys could talk. I learned all of that, which actually did come in handy when I was living in Louisiana, because somewhere around the 1940s they just quit. We were at a picnic, and Dave was, kind of hustled off to the group with the men. They were all out in the sun, and, I was with the women sitting in the shade, and the guys weren't really talking to him, and the women weren't really talking to me. And so I could hear somebody asked Dave, one of my gazillion relatives asked Dave, if he wanted a beer. And so Dave said, yeah. The guy looks over to the crowd of us women and said, which one of you is Dave's woman? Yo. Dave wants a beer. In that moment, all the men were looking at him. And in that moment, all the women were looking at me. And it was like, okay, I can stand up and go, oh good, tell him to get me one while he's doing it. Or I did what I did. I went over, got a beer, walked over to him, out to the sun, popped it open for him, did the 2 taps just so it didn't fizz up. Dad taught me that too. Handed it to him with one of those smiles that said, don't get used to this. And went back over. Now, after that point, the men were all talking to him and the women were all talking to me. It was that southern rite of passage. Okay, can you play along? And because my father taught me that I could adapt to an environment without becoming it. It's like, okay, if I'm, when in Rome, and we were in a place that was not Kansas anymore, and it certainly wasn't Milpitas. So it's like, okay. My dad allowed me to do that. He taught me survival skills. He taught me what it meant to be empathic. He always said, you are more like me than anybody else. And he would feel things, and yet he always kept them private. Once when I was little, I walked into the room and my dad had been traumatized in the military. They used to call it shell shock. But, it was PTSD. And I walked into the room one day because my mom always told us, walk loud. Don't tiptoe, don't walk quiet. Walk loud, so he knew we were coming. And he was very sensitive to that. And I mean, you don't have to tell 4 kids to walk loud twice. Howdy! But I walked in and I looked and I saw my dad was sitting and crying. And I went in and I said, Daddy? I said, why are you crying? And he looked at me and he said, I missed you. And he gave me a hug. And I held him. And I had no idea what he needed from me right at that moment, but I knew he needed me just to be there with him. And my dad used to say, my mother knew him best, but I understood him best. Because when he was in one of his moods, I could come in and talk to him. This led to a huge guilt feeling for me. When my dad started getting sick, he wasn't taking care of himself, he wasn't eating right, and I always felt that, and I was living in Louisiana at the time, and I always thought to myself, if I had been there, he would have taken better care of himself. I could have gotten him to do that. I could have made him take better care of himself, so he died because of me. Didn't make any sense, but I carried that until he let me off the hook. A few years before my dad got sick, we had all us kids, the 4 of us and all of our kids, we got together and we took a family picture. My dad had always wanted a family picture. So we did it for Christmas. And it was the last present open and we brought it out and he and my mom opened it and my mom's getting all giggly and crying and everything. My dad's just like, okay, well, nice frame. It's, you guys are all looking in the same direction. That's good. Good. The kids are all clean. Nice. And we're like, oh, wow. Try to control yourself. Don't get all broken up on us. Later that day, I walked past my father's office. And I saw him sitting at his big desk and he had the picture in front of him and he was crying. There was pride in his face, and yet there was something I picked up, something like, I've done my job. The legacy's complete. It was after that he started getting very sick. And as I said, I was in Louisiana. He came out to visit me, like the last time, and we had such a great time together. And the whole time he was with me, it's like, come on, Dad, you need to take your pill. Come on, you need to take, we need to eat. Let's go eat. And we talked as we had never talked before. before. And maybe part of him knew that I wouldn't be there for that last time because he got all the stuff he wanted to say to me out then. And I treasure it. And so when I got a call from my brother saying that my father was in a coma, and I flew out, and I came in, and he was there. He was at the Palo Alto VA. And I just went in and took his hand and just started talking to him. Hey, Dad. Oh, I'm so glad you waited for me. And my brother said, he's unconscious. And I said, only his body. My mom said she knew that when I walked in, that would be my response, that I would just go and we would have that bond. And, and I was telling him, Dad, Andre, who's my youngest brother, I said, Andre's on his way. Can you wait for him? Because he was starting to go. He stabilized. He waited for my youngest brother to make it there. Well, the next day was my younger brother's birthday. And he said, I don't want Dad to go on my birthday. And I said, well, tell him. So my dad died the night before. And when we were, I was over at my older brother's house, and we were on our way. We would have been the first ones there. We would have actually gotten there right before he died. And all of a sudden, he had this van with the little teeny tiny hoods, like a Dodge Ram van or something. All of a sudden, the hood pops up and hits the windshield.
Oh, wow.
Not bad enough to break it, but it was bad enough to delay us. By the time we got there, he was gone. And my brother had it inspected. There was nothing wrong with that latch. Which it's like, Dad, really? If you had to delay me, why did you have to ruin my windshield?
Yeah.
But he didn't want us there to see him go. He needed to do that alone. And after he died, there was a huge memorial at the city of Milpitas. And they named a park after him, which we found out that day. They named like one of the big parks in Milpitas after my father. And so they announced that, and there's like 300-400 people. They flew the flag in City Hall at half-mast for 2 days for my father. And so, we're all sitting there, and they announced that they're dedicating the park, and we're like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And then it's like, and now we're going to have someone from the family get up and speak. We all look at my oldest brother, and he's like, not a chance. It's like, Angie, you're second. I'm out. My younger brother is like, well, I'm the youngest. I don't have to do it. And he's like, well, what about Mom? It's like, we're not going to make Mom do that. And I could hear my dad next to me going, you know what you got to do. So I got up, and I stood in front of these hundreds of people, feeling very small and tiny behind a podium. And I could hear my dad saying, girl, don't you embarrass me. You do not do that. You be strong, like I taught you. This is just another political event, and you are going to represent me well. I have no earthly idea what I said. Apparently it was truly brilliant and touching. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, could you, I'd like to get the notes from that. I have none. My uncle, my mom's brother, said that he saw me close my eyes, take a breath, and he said he felt like there was another presence that just kind of came in. And that presence was my dad. Since he passed, he hangs around quite a bit. All of a sudden I'll smell Aramis. Because that was, I think my dad only liked it because it was expensive.
But it smelled good.
I'll go have Aramis. So it's like, okay, you can use it with a little bit less, but it's all right. But he still shows up. And there are times when it's like it's in that state of dreams. I call it not dreaming. But it's in that place where that magical time happens. And I said, Dad, what are you doing here? And he said, baby, you need me. That's why I'm here. Years later, I began to train with Norman Granado. And he, it's like I'd heard people talking about spirituality before, and it's like, okay, I think I believe you, but I'm still, my father also taught me to be skeptical. And so it's like, well, you know, I don't know if I'm buying into this and all that. But one day Norbert and I were sitting, and he looked at me, and he called me by that nickname, that special name that I put at the bottom of my letters, that was only for my dad. My mom didn't know. My, at that time, husband didn't know. Nobody knew that name but my father. And Norbert called me by that name. And I looked at him and I said, why did you call me that? And he looked at me and he said, because your father told me that that was the only way you would believe me. I said, you have my attention. My dad did not have an easy time being a father. I know that. I don't think that any father worth the title will ever say they had an easy time being a father. And whether it is, you know, you're fathering children, you gave birth to children who look up to you, whether it's mentoring. You know, I was so happy that, you know, we have the men's group, because you guys can get together and you can sit and talk about what it means to be male, about, you know, male energy, what that means, how you walk in this world to support each other as you do that, to be a safe place where you guys can say, hey, I'm not sure. I wish my dad had something like that, because I think it would have been gentler for him. And I really honor you that you guys have that and that you do that. I will never stop loving my dad. I mean, you know, I love my mom and everything, and this day is for him. June 25th was his birthday, so we would celebrate usually Father's Day and his birthday, you know, pretty close together. I know that he will love me forever. And I know that he will always be a part of that divine masculine for me. He may not have always done it right, but I know for a fact if he made a mistake, it wasn't because he didn't care about me. He just didn't know. And I think that's the most important thing that I appreciate most about fathers. They keep trying. They screw up. They come back in. They do their best. And I appreciate that. And for those that don't, I don't believe it's because they don't want to. I think it's just they don't know how. And I appreciate them. I watched my ex-husband make mistakes as a father, and yet I always backed him up because I knew how tough that was. So whether you're a father by blood, by choice, by marriage, by relationship, or simply by heart, I honor each and every one of you. And know that deep down, we know you mean well. We know you're trying your best. And we know that you will love us forever. Thank you.